Good afternoon. Welcome to the Great Lakes Fishing Podcast and Fish Hawk Live. And today we are joined by Mark Romanack from Fishing 411 TV. Mark, thanks so much for joining the show today.
Chris, it's always my pleasure. I look forward to this, man.
I know you've been busy and you've been out filming and shooting some shows. Tell us a little bit about how your summer is going so far.
Actually, that's going really good. The majority of our shows for Fishing 411 are going to be shot from April through October. And this year, I don't know why things just fell in place nicely because we're typically right to the bitter end, shooting shows right to the end of fall. But this year, we're sitting on 11 completed already. That might be a record. I probably just jinxed myself because I'll probably have a bunch of canceled shows from going out the rest of the season here. But right now, I'm very content to be sitting on 11 episodes. And we're not even into September yet. So lots of great fishing to come. And so I think it'll be an easy year as far as for television goes.
Find some wood to knock on.
For real. I've been jinxed. And of course, as a fisherman, I am, I guess I tend to be that guy that worries about such things. You won't find any bananas in my boat. Let's put it that way.
Right. Well, we're going to talk some spoons today. And first of all, let's kind of get into, is a spoon a spoon? When people are out shopping for spoons and they're thinking about loading up the tackle box, first of all, just talk about kind of the different types of spoons.
Well, definitely a spoon is not a spoon. I mean, there's different kinds of spoons for different applications. And even the early trolling spoons weren't all that productive at trolling because back then folks just simply didn't understand what it took to make a good trolling spoon. The first spoons people think of, it's things like the Eppinger Daredevil. I mean, it's been around forever. It's a tremendous spoon. But that is definitely a casting spoon. It is not a trolling spoon. It's just too heavy to have good action at the speeds that we would normally troll at. And so the first thing you have to be looking at is that trolling spoons are typically going to be thinner. That's a good thing and it's a bad thing. The good thing is that a thin spoon has a lot of action at relatively slow speeds. So they can be trolled slow, moderate speeds and even fast speeds and get great action. The downside is that they're easily bent. And so if you get a big kahuna tuna on there and you're struggling with this big salmon, by the time you get it in the boat, there's a pretty good chance that fish has destroyed your spoon. And once they're bent, you can't bend them back and get them to do what they're supposed to do. It just doesn't work that way. And so a spoon doesn't last forever. In other words, I'm replacing spoons every single year. It's just a matter of the game that you're playing. And some species of fish are worse than others. In my opinion, the coho is the one that kills a lot of our spoons because, as you know, they roll a lot. And when they roll and twist, that's what damages the spoon. And they do it not only in the water, but as soon as they hit the landing net, they're doing it even more. And so if that spoon catches in the mesh of your landing net and that fish is twisting, there's a pretty good chance that spoon is toasted. And so we go through a fair number of spoons. It's just part of the game and replacing them every year to make sure that we got spoons that are the right shape for the right presentation.
Yeah, I think a lot of captains and fishermen like to look at those spoons, though, that are all busted up and war torn, and they almost think of it kind of like a prideful thing, like, hey, this spoon is hot. Look at all the fish this thing has caught. So at what point do you go, all right, enough's enough for this spoon?
Well, you can pretty well tell if you look at it and it's tweaked. I'm not talking about just scratches on the finish and stuff from the teeth, but if you look at it, you can clearly see that it's bent and you put it up alongside another spoon. An easy litmus test is take two spoons, lay one on top of another. And if they don't mesh perfectly, with a spoon, is true, then the spoon is tweaked and it's no good no more. And I just toss them in a pile and that pile just gets bigger and bigger. Some guys will get creative and they'll make things like lake trolls out of them and stuff like that. But personally, I don't worry about it. I'm of that camp that says, hey, that spoon did what it was supposed to do. I don't feel bad now that it's not in my lineup. So kind of like a crankbait that doesn't have any paint left on it because it's caught so many fish. So it's a cool thing.
You should autograph them and sell them at shows and say, hey, the great Mark Romanack fished with this spoon. And then they could, put that up on their bookshelf.
I'd probably have to pay people to take them. They want them for free. But this is part of the game. So, and some spoons are more notorious for bending than others. The larger the spoon is, the more surface area it is, the more likely it's going to bend. Smaller spoons tend to be used for smaller species that are less aggressive, and they don't tend to bend so much. Like, for example, the little junior streaks that we use for walleye, I almost never bend one of those. But the standards and the magnums that we use for trout and salmon, they get bent constantly. So it's just part of the game.
Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit. That's a good segue. Let's talk about sizes and how do you go about kind of deciding what size to dip in the water when you're about ready to set up your trolling program?
Well, largely, Chris, it comes down to what you're trying to imitate, what forage is out there that you're trying to imitate, and that'll of course have a big factor on what type of fish that you're trying to target. If you're going after salmon, now there's a pretty good chance you're going to be using the larger size spoons, what they're typically called magnums, or the standard size spoons, because those are the size that do a really good job of imitating the thing a salmon is likely to eat: smelt, alewives, gizzard shad, that type of thing. If you're going after a smaller species like walleye, and you're trying to use a salmon spoon, that's just not really going to be applicable because walleye are eating different forage. A walleye is more likely to be eating something like an emerald shiner, which is a smaller and more slender bait fish. And so you want a slender spoon to replicate that the best as possible. And then there's medium-sized spoons, and I use a lot of silver streaks, and I have some spoons here that I brought along for sampling. And this one over here on the far side here by my hand right now, that's a magnum. That's what I would describe as a salmon spoon. The one next to it, of course, is a standard. Again, that's a salmon and a trout spoon. And then the next one over here, this one here that I'm kind of jiggling with there, that's called a mini. And that's a useful spoon because it has a lot of application. We catch trout and salmon on it. We catch brown trout on it. But it's also a good walleye spoon as well. And then the far side there, the smallest one, that's called a junior streak. And about the only thing I use that for is walleye fishing. I know some guys use them for some other applications, but that's my go-to walleye spoon.
All right, so it's a good look at sizing. We got a question here from High Point Outdoors over on YouTube, and they're asking, does size and the color of spoons you choose change depending on water temperature?
Not so much. Typically when we're targeting trout and salmon, we're looking for a specific water temperature that we know they're going to be abundant in. And that typically runs from 50 to about 60 degrees. For example, I was just steelhead fishing just recently, and the coolest water we could find was 60 degrees, and that's where the steelhead were. And so the spoon size is not as relevant as what the available forage is going to be. If you're using a big spoon like a magnum, but those fish have been keyed on feeding on smaller smelt, maybe a 3-inch smelt, your spoon is not going to look natural to them because they're not used to a forage that big, and they're going to abandon that spoon, not necessarily strike that spoon as readily. The example I would use is I go to Lake Ontario in the springtime. In the springtime, all of the forage fish are as large as they're going to be because they've already completed the full life cycle. So if you're talking about an alewife that's 6 inches long, that big magnum spoon is going to be something that it's going to do a nice job of replicating that. And backwards here, looking into the camera, of course, but the larger spoon on there is the magnum. So to me, I'm looking more about the size of the forage to match the spoon, and I'm not too concerned about water temperature. Water temperature is going to play to trolling speed, and that's another whole subject that we'll want to get into today, is talking about what trolling speed is applicable for what spoons.
Yeah, let's do that now. Let's talk about your trolling speeds and kind of what you choose depending on what spoon you're using and what species you're chasing.
Okay. Well, typically speaking, water temperature dictates trolling speed for the most part. When it's real cold water, we're naturally going to slow down because those fish are going to be a little bit more lethargic in cold water than they would be in warm water. But the exception to that rule is trout and salmon. Even in cold water, salmon will chase baits at a relatively high rate of speed. 2.2 to 2.5 miles an hour is not uncommon, even when the water is only 42 to 45 degrees. So in that situation, you're dealing with something that's a little bit different, dichotomy. Those fish will chase even in cold water. But other species of fish, like let's say for example, a walleye. A walleye is a warm water species. They typically are not interested in spoons until you get to the point where you control about 2 miles an hour. And for me, that water temperature is about 60 degrees. So when the water temperature gets to about 60 degrees, I start thinking spoons, because now I know I can go fast enough to give the spoon great action. The problem with a lot of spoons is that if you get below 2 miles an hour, you're going to lose a lot of action on those spoons. So most spoons come to life at 2 to 2.2 to 2.5. That's where they're the best. If you dip down to 1.8 to 1.9, you might have action or you might not. And it depends on the spoon. Also depends on whether you're trolling into the sea or whether you're trolling with a following sea. So keeping those things in mind, there's a lot to understanding how to get the most out of spoons. In general, I would say a spoon is a presentation that shines better at higher speeds.
All right, let's talk a little bit about, you said presentation. We got a question that actually is pretty timely over on Facebook. What's your favorite way to run the spoon? Rigger, dipsy, lead core? Kind of what does your program look like?
All of the above. I know that's kind of a cop out, but actually we use all of those things, and I highly recommend even walleye guys. Walleye guys are not really downrigger guys for the most part. You look at a typical walleye fisherman, he probably doesn't have downriggers, but you really ought to. Because downriggers are a tremendous presentation for all of the species. There's nothing better for depth control. So I'm using spoons on all of those presentations. If the water is super clear, an example like Lake Michigan, the Michigan side of Lake Michigan, those waters can be gin clear. It's not uncommon to have 20 or 30-foot visibility. Certainly lead cores and copper lines, weighted steel, sinking lines in general that are fished on inline boards that you can get out to the side that are more stealthy are going to probably be your best producers. Things like dipsy divers, historically, we always just ran a 6-foot leader behind a dipsy diver. Now we run things like slide divers that allow us to put a longer leader behind the diver itself, primarily in clear water. But I always, every day when I'm trout and salmon fishing, and many times with walleye fishing, I always have riggers in the water as well. The show we just shot in Lake Erie that I was talking about just briefly was primarily about steelhead, but there were walleyes there, and we caught a lot of them on downriggers and fish we probably wouldn't have caught otherwise, because a downrigger gives you much better control for your depth. So when those fish are at a very specific depth, you can't beat a downrigger for depth control.
Very good. You talked a little bit about the different ways that you fish it. How about other things that you would add to your presentation? Things like inline flashers. Can you talk a little bit about that?
That's interesting, because a lot of people simply don't understand that you don't have to fish a spoon clean. You can fish it with an attractor. There's a variety of them out there that guys can use. The one that I've fallen on that I seem to like the best is a product made by Yakima Bait. It's called a spin fish. It's triangular in shape, and they're very popular in the Pacific Northwest. You don't see a lot of guys here using them in the Great Lakes yet, but it's triangular in shape, and the reason I like it is because it doesn't create any drag or resistance. A typical attractor, like a rotator, is going round and round like this in the water, creating a fair amount of resistance. Whereas a spin fish is just spinning on its own axis. And so the beauty of it is it puts out more flash. So I'll rig a spin fish on the line, and then I'll rig my spoon directly behind it, about 6 feet away. So you get a spin fish that's creating flash, and then you've got your spoon trailing that. I'll take that whole rig and I'll set it behind a downrigger 20 to 50 feet, depending on the clarity of the water. And that has been lights out for me. And I can't tell you how many walleyes, steelhead, cohos, king salmon, brown trout we've caught doing that. So that extra flash brings those fish into the gear. And then once they get into the gear and get close, then of course they see the spoon and it's game on.
Very good. You talked about running it clean. How about tipping? Do you do any sort of tipping of spoons when you're out trolling?
You see guys do that for walleye a fair amount, where they're putting a little piece of nightcrawler around there. And I believe that they're doing that for the scent purposes. And I think there are better ways to do that. I don't like hanging anything on the spoon because it can deaden the action of the spoon pretty quickly. These actions of spoons are pretty subtle, and you do anything, hang anything on them, and then suddenly, all of a sudden, you don't have the action. You're not getting bit on those spoons. So if you like scent and you wanna add a scent stream to the water, I think you're further ahead to use a scent product. We use a lot of Procure. We like Super Gel. It's real sticky, and you put it on a spoon, it stays on a spoon. I only apply it about every 30 to 40 minutes. So that's a lasting scent stream. And when I'm doing a scent stream, I'm simply trying to match what I think the fish are feeding on. If they're feeding on smelt, I'm using a smelt scent. If they're feeding on alewife, I'm using an alewife scent. If they're feeding on gizzard shad, guess what? I'm using a gizzard shad scent. So you can match the hatch really nicely there and make that spoon not only look good enough to eat, but just as importantly, smell good enough to eat.
Probably the thing that people who fish talk more about when they talk about buying gear, especially lures, is going to be color, and that's something that people debate about all the time. Tell me about colors and kind of what goes into that when you're selecting what you're going to be throwing in the water.
I've been known for saying this many times in my career. I look at color as important. I mean, we all know that certain colors work better on certain days, depending on the water clarity, light penetration, all those variables. But the fact is, I believe we put way too much emphasis on color and not nearly enough emphasis on presentation, and whether it's the spoon or whatever lure is doing what it's supposed to be doing. That stated, we have biases, and I'm just as guilty as the next guy. I've got my biases of colors that I like. When it comes to trout and salmon, particularly king salmon and coho salmon, I'm going to pick spoons that got green, they got blue, they got chartreuse on them, and they're going to have silver backs every single time. I don't use a gold back or a copper back spoon when I'm salmon fishing. I want silver. I'm trying to replicate, the flash of an alewife basically what I'm trying to do. And so to me, that's really important. Now, you go to the other end of the spectrum, walleyes. Man, the walleye spoons are the craziest colors you've ever seen. I mean, I've got ones with pink backs, chartreuse backs, ones that have what I would call an antifreeze back, which is kind of a dye coat. And then the front surfaces can be painted any darn color you can possibly imagine. Some of the craziest color combinations work very well for walleye because they're contrasting. They stand out. And because that spoon stands out against the crowd, guess what? That's the fish see it and they attack it. So crazy colors seem to work really, really well for the walleye. But when it comes to trout and salmon, I'm looking at pretty much the standards. I probably have 6 or 8 standard colors that I carry all the time that I depend on heavily. And then if we talk briefly about steelhead, you can use any color you want for steelhead. As long as it's got some orange on that spoon, it's going to get bit. I'm a real big advocate of orange when it comes to steelhead fishing. A whole spoon doesn't have to be orange. It can be just a tip of orange or just a little piece of orange on it. But a silverback spoon with some orange on the face is going to catch steelhead day in and day out.
You kind of sound like my grandpa. He used to say, we can have whatever we want for dinner as long as it's steak.
Well, if it's not broke, it's not time to fix it. And, the thing is that I'm probably guilty of not experimenting enough with color because I'm successful with the colors that I use. And so I tend to go back to them. And I think we all suffer from that bias. And so it's kind of nice once in a while to have somebody else in the boat and they say, well, what color should I use? And you say, well, you pick today. And invariably the person's going to grab a color I would have never touched. and lo and behold, they catch fish on it. And so we just get too refined in our color selections. I think that it's just one of those things that we are as fishermen. We're too biased in that particular opinion.
I've been blessed to be able to fish with some really, really good fishermen. And the thing that blows me away, it's not even color choice, but it's patterns. And sometimes you look at those patterns and there's not that much difference between the two. So how much do you play around with patterns? I mean, after you've got your color, you're going to use green. How much of a difference do you think those patterns really make?
There's a couple ways to look at patterns. One of the ways I like flash patterns is that I'll tend to choose a spoon that's got some glow in the dark on it, for example. Now, I don't like spoons that are too much glow in the dark. I think that's overbearing, and I think that actually repels fish. But if you have a little strip that's glow in the dark on an otherwise spoon that's not glowing, that can be very, very effective. And so if you are fishing early in the day or late in the day and are using a glow spoon that's going to get a little bit more visibility at deep water, I think that's a huge advantage. So that's a good way you can do that. But mostly I look at it as contrast. And what I'm talking about is I want the different colors on the spoon to be highly contrasting to one another so that each complements the other. I don't want similar colors side by side because they blend in together. If you have, orange down one side, and a darker color like a black or purple on the other side, they're going to be very contrasting to one another. And to me, that makes the spoon more easy to be seen as those contrasting colors.
All right, I think we've done a pretty good job kind of going through a lot of the things you think about. Is there something that you can think about, Mark, that I didn't ask you about that's important?
Absolutely. I think leader and the diameter of the leaders that we use can make a big difference. Grab a quick drink here. The thing that I think a lot of us don't give a lot of consideration to is how does leader impact on lure action? Now, if you're a salmon guy and you're fishing lead cores, or even maybe on your downrigger rods and stuff, you're probably having a minimum of 20-pound test line, and that's fine. If you're trolling with a Magnum spoon or a standard spoon, you're probably going to do just fine with 20-pound test. But what happens if you get an opportunity to go? Maybe you're going to chase brown trout or maybe walleye, and you're going to run those mini size or those smaller spoons like the junior streaks. If you're running 20-pound test on them, you're not getting the action out of the spoon you could get, and so it's probably going to cost you. So people are thinking, oh God, Mark's going to tell me I got to redo my leaders on all of my lead cores every single time I go back and forth. We don't do that. Basically, I put a 20-pound leader on all of my lead cores, all of my coppers, all of my weighted steel lines, and even my downriggers. And so if I want to run a shorter leader, or a lighter leader, what I'll run is just a 6-foot leader of a lighter material. Typically for brown trout, for coho, for walleye, where I'm using smaller spoons, I drop down to a 15-pound test. And 6 foot of 15-pound test is absolutely perfect to get that spoon lively. It makes a huge, huge difference.
All right, very good, Mark. I know you guys have been busy. I've seen some different Facebook posts and I think Instagram posts of you guys out doing some work with precision trolling data, and that's going to be pretty important information when we're running spoons as well. Tell us a little bit about what you have going on there right now.
Well, this is the time of year that we do our precision trolling testing. As a lot of people know, we do it with a scuba diver. Scuba divers in the water, and we're trolling past the scuba diver. So we're pretty much limited to diving when the water temperatures are 50 degrees or warmer, and that's because you really can't be in the water for any extended period of time at water that's colder than 50 degrees. And so summertime is, it's peak time for us. So we'll be doing precision trolling testing now all the way up until the water temperature starts dropping down to about 50. And where I live here in northern Michigan, that's usually about the 1st of October. So we're usually wrapped up by the 1st of October. From a big water perspective, we're going to be doing a lot more stuff for big water, a lot more lead core data, a lot more dipsy type data is going to be coming in the future. So we've been working on that this summer as well. So I would estimate that, when it's all said and done, we'll probably test 35 to 40 new crankbaits. We always do quite a few new crankbaits every year. We'll definitely expand on the 50+2, which is snap weights in combination with crankbaits. Everybody loves that. And people are eating that data up for sure. So believe me, what we've just talked about, those things right there, that's enough to keep me busy for more than the summer.
So you've got a lot going on, and of course, working with the show. Mark's website is fishing411.net. And
Right.
where can people find the show?
This time of year, we're on World Fishing Network. So if you want to see the show on national broadcast television, you'll see it on World Fishing Network both 3rd and 4th quarter. And there's a lot of broadcasts out there. I think they're giving us like 4 a week. And so there's lots of broadcasts out there. If you don't have World Fishing Network, the easiest way to find us is going to be simply going to YouTube. Our YouTube channel is very popular. Views are going up constantly. Everybody, knows about YouTube and uses it, to a high degree. So you'll find us on YouTube. And then there's another thing called myoutdoortv.com. And My Outdoor TV is kind of like the Netflix of outdoor television. You have to pay a small monthly fee, but everybody has got content there. So there's an extensive amount of content that you can get for a very small monthly fee. And we're there, of course, as well. So all of our content is on all of those different venues. So you shouldn't have too much trouble finding Fishing 411 if you're looking for it.
Very good. Mark Romanack from Fishing 411 TV. We appreciate you coming on the show today and talking spoons with us. And I think a lot of people enjoyed the conversation and hopefully learned quite a bit as well.
Well, it's been my pleasure. These are great learning tools. I think people take advantage of things like the podcast you're putting together. It can make them a lot better fishermen.
All right. Thanks to Mark. Thanks to everyone for watching and listening today. And we will talk to you next time.